Welcome to the Model Health Show. This is fitness and nutrition expert Shawn Stevenson here with my beautiful, talented, gifted co-host and producer of the Model Health Show, Jade Harrell. What's up, Jade?
What's going on, Shawn?
How are you today?
I am glow-inspiring.
Glow-inspiring. Okay.
Glowing and inspiring today. I'm lit up.
I see that.
I'm lit up.
I see that. That reminded me of Gloria Estefan.
Oh, man.
How you put that together.
I would take that honor any day. She's still amazing.
Hashtag legend.
Right.
You know, what is it called? Was it Miami Sound Machine?
Yes.
Is that right?
Look at you.
I know, right?
You're before your time.
Well, you know, they say I have an old soul.
Yeah,
whatever that means. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. We've got an incredible episode lined up for you and a really amazing guest who is going to drop some knowledge bombs, change a paradigm about some, we're going to talk about different subject matter, but something I really wanted to focus on was like get the guy on this term called adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
Right? This is something that's becoming very pervasive in our culture today. But what does it even mean, really? And should we even be calling it that, right? So we're going to dig into that. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to our show sponsor, Organifi. Head over to Organifi.com/model. That's ORGANIFI.com/model. And you're going to get 20% off of their green juice blend. And this is something that I use on a consistent basis, that I give to my kids on a consistent basis. This is a green superfood blend. And here's the key. This is why it's so important, is that it's cold processed. It's gently dried. It's not fried, dyed, baked, broiled, fricasseed. Like, you're not even getting the stuff that they say is in there. You know, nutrients, it's not just in one form. Like if you look at Mendele's table of elements, right? That's like measuring the ash of the magnesium, right? It's not the same thing in how it exists in nature. There are different forms of all of these substances. And in their natural state is the ideal way for the human body. This is how we've been evolving to consume these things. So when you're getting synthetic and or supplements that have just been created without regard to the processing, that's a big problem. And so this is why I love Organifi as my kind of vitamin mineral supplement versus the synthetic supplements that are out there. Even some of the, quote, better ones, you know, that are using whole food-based formulas, how are they processing it? And so this is really simple. It's something you can add to your smoothies, just toss in the water. Do you have that over there? Is that what you're sipping on?
Exactly.
I like that. I see you. You got the green shaker bottle and the greens inside. So it's kind of sneaky.
Kind of a Jade thing going on.
It's got that Grinch. It's got the Grinch that stole Christmas kind of flow to it.
Can I get a Kermit or something?
Okay.
I'd go with Kermit. Thank you.
Kermit. So this is why I love them. Also, the combination. They have the chlorella, organic chlorella, and this is really beneficial for removing heavy metals. Also, our unique compound called chlorella growth factor, which has some really interesting clinical studies on some benefits for human physiology. We got spirulina, the most dense protein food on the planet, gram for gram, 71% protein by weight. This is the highest protein food that we know about. Chlorella also, it's around 50% protein by weight. So it's like spirulina, blue-green algae, chlorella. Those are the top three. Also, they have ashwagandha. We're talking about a very powerful adaptogen. It's been used in Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years. Turmeric, coconut water, mint makes it taste good. That's the outside biggest benefit, is it actually tastes good. And I've used dozens and dozens of different green blends on your behalf, green powders. It's pleasurable. But Organifi is just simply amazing. So head over there, check them out, Organifi.com/model. Now let's get to the iTunes review of the week.
This is funny. The Meal Replacement Podcast, 5 stars. This podcast is so jam-packed with informational goodies that I actually unsubscribed from another health and wellness podcast I had subscribed to a while back. I was getting so much yummy education from this one that it didn't make sense to keep snacking on the other. You guys keep me full and focused. Thank you so much for giving this gift to your listeners. Much love from Laura.
Oh my goodness, Laura, thank you so much. Big hug. I don't want to break up happy homes. You know, let me make that clear. But I'm so glad that you are part of this community. It means the world to me. And everybody, thank you so much for being a part of the Model Health Show community. We are making a big difference, and I just truly appreciate you making us a part of your lives. And I promise you, the best is yet to come. And it starts with today. So today we've got on the one and only Dr. Alan Christianson. Dr. Alan Christianson is a naturopathic endocrinologist and the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Adrenal Reset Diet. And Dr. C's gift for figuring out what really works has helped hundreds of thousands of people reverse thyroid disease, lose weight, cure diabetes, and regain their energy. And he is here today on the Model Health Show to really break some of these things down that are causing a lot of struggle and putting people in a desperate state. So I'm very honored and happy to welcome to the Model Health Show, Dr. Alan Christianson. How you doing today, man?
Hey, Shawn. I am doing awesome. I'm super jazzed to be here with you guys. Let's have some fun.
Awesome. So excited to have you on. And we met at Consumer Health Summit. I think it's going on maybe at least a year ago. And you're just somebody who really stuck out. And I think you were like going to go climb a mountain or something, like on a break. It was so random. Like, are you serious? Is this guy a superhero? But if people really knew your story behind the scenes, for you doing something like that is truly remarkable. So can you take us back to the early days and what got you interested in health and wellness in the first place?
You know, it was totally selfish stuff. I was a really miserable, fat, epileptic kid. And it sucked, to be frank. I hit adolescence, and before then, you know, being a bookworm made up for whatever wasn't happening physically. But around then, I started realizing that the social world mattered, and I started caring about how I was perceived and how I was treated and how girls saw me or didn't see me, and this stuff started to become relevant. And I put down the nerdy science space books a little while, and I said, hey, I've got to go hit some health books. I've got to figure out a different path. And I realized that, you know, the data that we can have access to can just change our lives so radically. And that once your health shifts, everything is better. You know, the connections you make, the relationships, what you can do with your mission. And it wasn't so much what I was given from doctors, but it was information that I found myself as a kid and applied that turned the tides on everything.
So you were diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had cerebral palsy and complications from that, which included epilepsy and a lot of motor difficulties. So I really just couldn't run or play or be physically active or do most of those sorts of things.
So when people see you, I mean, when you think of cerebral palsy, you definitely don't think of somebody who is as vibrant and healthy and fit as you are. And you actually had some different kind of growing pains as you were moving past this. And you had one particular story that happened during college. Like I'm looking at your picture where you look like Axl Rose here. While you're out running. So can you tell us a little bit about that? I think it was like a 5K or something like that.
That was a milestone. So I think my first race would have been kindergarten. And in that one, we would run down to the end of the playground and back again. And the last runner was finished before me. And they're all waiting a long time for me to finally come in because I was like so far dead last. Well, the Axl Rose picture was the first race that I won.
Wow. So awesome. Coming from, like, again, when you started this being dead last to being first and just making that decision to transform your body, transform your health. But in school, you actually shifted gears and you decided to study endocrinology. So what brought that? Why endocrinology?
Well, yeah, so medicine was a natural extension for me. I had this burning desire to learn more for myself, but also this conviction that, you know, if I could figure these things out that help me this much, there's got to be a whole lot of people who are also suffering and they could use this information. And the conventional medical route was where I was headed, but I learned about the naturopathic profession very late in the game. I wanted to incorporate what worked for me as far as diet, lifestyle, and natural steps. And as I got close to entering conventional medical school, I had some mentors tell me, that's cool, kid, but you can't really do that. You know, if you're deviating from standards of practice, you'll lose your license, regardless of whether or not you're helping people. So I was glad to find a profession of peers that supported my views. And in my training, I came to see that so much of health is regulated by this delicate state of chemicals in the body. You know, we had these glands that made literally microscopic amounts of stuff that floated around that were just life or death. And lifestyle could influence that, but there was also these disease states that lifestyle could work around. So it was just a huge draw for me.
Wow. So you're talking right now, you're describing the endocrine system. So can we like drill that down for everybody and just share what the endocrine system or endocrinology really entails? What does that encompass?
You know, super simple thing. So imagine a corporation. Imagine this big entity that's running your body. And you've got the CEO of the corporation that oversees all the things, but it's not so much there in the day-to-day details. So that's the hypothalamus. That's a little tiny thing inside your brain. So imagine if you could pick your nose and go about an inch further up.
Yeah. I've seen somebody do that before.
They were there.
In traffic.
Go about an inch further up than you should. And yeah, you've got the hypothalamus and the pituitary right in there. So hypothalamus is the CEO. The pituitary is the main manager. So the manager is actually working with the workers. And that's going to be the thyroid gland, the pineal gland, the adrenals, the ovaries or testicles. So these glands make hormones, and the pituitary tells them to make more or less based upon what the hypothalamus tells it. And those things collectively make up the endocrine system. And the glands make chemicals that leave themselves and circulate throughout your whole body. And they control big things, like literally your gender, whether you've got blood sugar that's stable or not, whether your body's in a state of panic or fight or flight, whether you're fixing things, whether you're growing or not. So they're all things that are governed by these glands.
That's so powerful, and the word hormone, I like to tell people, like, give them a simple explanation of what that is as much as possible. And it's basically these chemical messengers that communicate information between all the cells in your body, right? So it's kind of like, if they're not present, this communication between your cells there can be civil unrest in a way. And also those messages can get miscommunicated if the wrong hormones are doing things at the wrong time. So this is super important stuff. Like, your endocrine system is in many ways your experience of the world, right? And it's really kind of like how you feel. Like, it's a deep, visceral thing based on his expertise. And so with that said, I want to shift gears and talk about some of these endocrine organs. You mentioned the hypothalamus kind of being like the master gland, the pituitary. The thyroid is along that path as well. And this is something that today, like the thyroid is just kind of under attack, And so I want to talk about maybe some misconceptions about the thyroid. Like, so first of all, just start off, what's the thyroid? Where is it? And we'll go from there.
Easy thing. So imagine someone wearing a bow tie. That's about the size and shape and location of the thyroid, pretty close to that. So it's something about the mass of that, and roughly butterfly shaped, and just below the Adam's apple, and it's right beneath the skin.
Got it.
That's the best understanding
the bow tie
I've
on
ever
there.
had. Oh my
I was
goodness.
like, who's getting married, huh? So
that's fantastic.
Now, with that said, the thyroid gland, why today is like Hashimoto's, like #1 autoimmune disease. So many people dealing with hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, especially conditions. Why is this gland so susceptible?
So endocrine glands in general and hormones are susceptible to disease, more so now because a lot of our hormones have chemical similarities to toxins from the environment. So pesticides, plastic compounds, solvents, metals. Now, this is doubly so for the thyroid because the thyroid has a concentrating pump that's there to take in iodine and concentrate iodine. And it should do that, but the problem is that so many chemicals we're exposed to are vaguely similar enough to iodine, they also get concentrated within the thyroid. So you may have 50 or 100 times as much lead or mercury or perchlorate or plastic in your thyroid as you do in your liver or in your bloodstream. So that's why we're seeing this disease on the rise.
Holy smokes.
Right.
And you're somebody who actually is looking at this gland. So to hear that, we really need to pay attention because where is this exposure coming? I know that obviously these are things we're picking up from our environment, but where specifically? What are some of the things we need to be more mindful of to protect our thyroid and not pull in some of these potentially volatile compounds?
Well, here's going to be a pretty wild concept, but the most documented toxicant by far for inducing all types of thyroid disease, you'd never guess it. It's iodine. Wow.
Would you look at that? Like your face.
Look at it.
Please tell me more. How is that?
So this is a bizarre relationship. Every nutrient you can think of, like magnesium or B12 or calcium, it's floating in your bloodstream, and that's how much your body uses. Your muscles use the amount of the concentration in your bloodstream. Your thyroid needs so much more than is found in your blood that it concentrates it. Now, the flip side of that concentrating is, imagine that the circuits that power the plugins in your kitchen, imagine that you suddenly got 1,000 times the amperage it was set up to handle. So what would happen?
It'd blow out.
Yeah.
You blow out, you blow a fuse. And that's built in so you don't burn your house down because the circuitry can change. So you've got that same fuse in your thyroid. It's a thing called the Wolff-Chaikoff effect. And whenever your intake of iodine goes above somewhere between 300 micrograms if you're prone to thyroid disease, or about 1,000 micrograms if you're not yet prone to it, when you get above that much, you blow the fuse and you shut everything off. But coming back online, that's when inflammation and autoimmunity and the risk for thyroid cancer can all set in.
So there's like a paradoxical thing here.
Yeah, because too little is a problem as well. You need at least 100 micrograms a day for the thyroid to function and operate. But there's this super narrow window that when you're below it or above it, there's more risks for thyroid disease.
So how would you recommend modulating that? It's because of that thin window. What should we look for? I mean, should we be looking for specific foods with the iodine that we need, or what do you suggest?
So to answer that, I would speak to a couple of different populations. So first off, population who has no thyroid disease and not on thyroid treatment and is not pregnant. So most people in that group that have a diet with some variety, they're probably fine. It's probably not really an important thing for them either way. The one pitfall would be iodine-rich supplements or iodine-containing supplements. Now, to those who are pregnant, they need a little bit more iodine. And if they're doing non-iodized salt, and if they're really limiting their intake of seafood, they could be a little low in that. And most prenatals have a little bit of iodine in them, which compensates. Now, the population on thyroid disease, it's a really different message for them because they're on thyroid medications. And those medications actually have a lot of iodine. So they're up against the upper limit just by default because they're on some thyroid pills. So that population needs to really watch every little extra microgram they can avoid.
Wow. That's probably really enlightening for a lot of people because one of the things that you hear, and this is what I was taught probably good solid 10 years ago, clinically, from people who really thought that they were helping to serve the cause of helping people with their thyroid, is to take more iodine, right? Supplement, people were taking capsules of like kelp. Like I saw somebody taking like 10 capsules of kelp. I'm just like, man, this might be an issue, And so,
well, it's logical. It's totally logical. The thyroid needs it, so you'd think more would help further.
Yeah.
But this is the phenomena that researchers have called the C-shaped curve of biology. So the C-shaped curve means that here's how much something happens, and here's how much you need for it to happen. So when you're lower in iodine, we see higher rates of thyroid disease. But when you're higher in iodine, the curve goes up over here, like a C on its back.
Yeah. We
We see higher rates of thyroid disease. So it's almost never that the more the merrier for a nutrient or hormone. It's more so that there's a sweet spot. Too little is bad and too much is bad. In some cases, that sweet spot's pretty generous and it's not hard to be inside of that. Yeah. But in some cases, it's just too darn narrow. And this is one of them.
Yeah. And like you mentioned earlier, a way to get this in an adequate amount, a few servings of seafood, sea veggies a week should be pretty solid, right?
You're in good shape. Most people have a hard time getting deficient in that. There are times to where we'll do nuclear scans of people's thyroid, and we have to have them iodine deficient going into it. It's actually hard to do. There's very specific diets that are pretty weird that you wouldn't fall into otherwise.
Interesting. So let's move down a little bit in the body and talk about the pancreas. I think the pancreas is overlooked a lot as far as being this really powerful endocrine organ. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what is the pancreas responsible for? And let's just start with that.
I love to talk about moving down the body. Let me give one more generalizing concept about hormones along that line.
Yeah.
So if we go further below the pancreas, then we're getting below the diaphragm. So above the diaphragm, hormones are all peptides. They're all chains of little proteins. You ever see the little plastic beads that kids can stick together and make long little chains out of those, different colored plastic shapes? And probably nasty stuff, but that's what an amino acid is like. That's what a peptide is like. So everything here up is peptides, thyroid hormones, pancreatic hormones, and that's why many of them don't work that well for pills, like the pancreatic hormones. Below the waist, they're all steroids. They're all modified cholesterol. Everything from the adrenals and the testicles and the ovaries are all steroids. So back to the pancreas, super huge organ. So that's mostly involved with food digestion and blood sugar regulation. And that's a factor in terms of just maintaining metabolic rate, also good body weight, storing versus burning. And actually, a lot of what it does, we're learning now, is dependent upon the liver working right also.
Oh, of course, we have to talk about the liver. So the hormones that the pancreas is producing. So let's talk a little bit about insulin and glucagon.
So the big two, insulin and glucagon, the beta cells make insulin and the alpha cells make glucagon. And the old idea about that prediabetes, diabetes, poor blood sugar was that it was all the pancreas's fault for not doing things right with insulin, for making too much of it in the body, getting numb to it. The new model that we're seeing is that if the pancreas does its job fine, but the liver doesn't work right, then we're actually making too much sugar by ourselves. So we see that with diabetics or pre-diabetics, they wake up with high blood sugar. And, in almost all cases, they didn't just eat. They woke up fasting and their blood sugar is too high. So we now have the technology to distinguish your blood sugar from what you made from what you ate. And it seems so logical that if you got high glucose, there must have been too much of something that made your body made into glucose that you ate recently. But now we're seeing, no, that in many of these people, it's more so what they've made, and it's not what came from their diet at all.
Wow. That's powerful, really important insight there. So on the other side of that with glucagon, so this essentially is working maybe in an opposite way of what insulin is doing?
Yeah, exactly. So insulin, think about glucose. Glucose is a car. You got to get the car inside the garage. So insulin's a garage door opener.
Love that. Love that. So insulin gets it in and glucagon gets it out.
To be really detailed now, what we've learned is that insulin helps get it in. It helps get it in faster, but it can actually drive through the garage door without insulin. That's been a rather recent finding. So they've taken some mice and they've made it to where they have no beta cells. They cannot produce insulin, but these mice don't respond to glucagon. And they're not diabetic. They have no high blood sugar, no complications of that.
Wow.
So what we're learning is that it's only a problem when insulin can't shut off the body's overproduction of glucose from the liver. And insulin does that by lowering the alpha cells' production of glucagon.
You know what? So this reminded me of like all the action movies ever where they drive right through the door. They drive right through the gate.
Yeah.
There's a recent movie, I think it's called like, it's something with Zach Galifianakis. It's like based on a true story.
Oh.
And he's accelerating through the through the gate, like to get away from, people following him. He's like, "Hold on, honey." And he hits that gate. Boom. The car goes nowhere.
The bank robbery one. I
yes.
saw that.
It was so unexpected. Like I was rolling, because usually you just bust right through. Airbags came out. He didn't get through the fence. But anyways.
So in this analogy, would that mean that the garage door is remaining open and there's too many things coming in?
Too many things coming in.
It.
Yep.
Okay.
Got too many cars on the road.
Yeah.
So this is a great spot to jump in, and I think the movie is called Mastermind, if I remember.
Yeah. It was really good.
So since the relationship with the liver here, and we've talked about this recently with Dr. Isabella Wentz, and having that connection and how important the liver is, even with relationship with the thyroid. And so with the pancreas, let's talk about that relationship, because I don't think people identify the liver typically as being like such an important endocrine gland in the first place, but it has so many valuable jobs that it does. So let's shift gears and talk about that.
Well, the cheesy tagline is you can't live without your liver.
Right. Yes. Liver. Yes.
So what's happening is that our body has to have glucose for fuel, and we can run on ketones. That's not our preferred fuel. We've got a lot of ways to not go into ketosis if we can avoid that, but we can as a backup. So glucose is preferred fuel for the body, and when there's not enough coming into the system, we make it from the liver, and that's called gluconeogenesis. We can also make our muscles into glucose if there's not enough stored up in the liver. So the pancreas makes insulin, which first off helps to make the garage door open more easily. But then also if blood sugar is low, it pumps out a lot of glucagon. So the detailed story is that making insulin in those beta cells actually calms down the production of glucagon from the alpha cells. And if it didn't, you'd make sugar when you didn't need to. But in this issue about type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, the alpha cells aren't calmed down enough. So the body is stuck in this state of gluconeogenesis. And the paradox is that, based on the old model of just glucose being bad and glucose coming from the diet, it seems so logical that you would just quit eating carbs and it would all get better. But this is probably about a dozen years ago. I was following that theory, and I would test people with a continuous glucose monitor. So this is a pretty neat device. You wear a little piece of tape with a small wire on your skin, and there's a sensor like the size of an old style pager, And you track your blood sugar 24/7. Like every minute of the day, you see not just the level, but the rate of change, how quickly it's moving up or down. And what I would see is that for a big subset of people, the less carbohydrate they ate, the higher their glucose levels went. What? And the more they would have complications.
How is that possible?
That's gluconeogenesis. Yeah. So when your blood sugar starts to dip too low, if there's a rapid rate of change, many people's bodies freak out and they start converting muscle into glucose so fast that it's just pouring into their bloodstream.
Yeah. We've talked about this several times on the show. You're like, how does that happen?
I know, because this is like...
But this is, your body is so... it's like there's an innate intelligence, which it's all about survival for your body. And if it's perceiving this threat, and so like, and we're going to shift gears and talk about the adrenals, even, the rise in stress hormones can trigger that, and so that's really, it's so important to understand that because it's not just about the food. And I think we get caught up in that. And me being a nutritionist for many years, I'm like, it's all about the food. It's the food. You got to eat this way. But it's so much more than that.
Well, and just one deep concept that sprang to my mind when you're talking about the body and its self-regulation is that it's odd, but there's some things that are hugely complex that you can explain with very simple formula, like how the planets stay in orbit around the sun, or huge cosmological things you can put in tiny little formula. But biology is so different because it's self-regulating. You assume that if you do more of X, you get more of Y. But because things manage themselves internally, you don't. You may do more of X and get like no Y, and then at some point you might get a lot of it. There's not a lot of simple linear relationships because the body is so self-regulating.
Yes, indeed. And we got to go back. We got to get in some controversy. We got to get some controversy going. So you mentioned that ketones are not an optimal fuel.
Sure.
Now, we've had, of course, physicians who recommend ketosis. Then more so, I'm seeing that, the more successful physicians out there who are really impacting a lot of lives are more so saying that this is a tool to use, but to do some cycling and things like that. So when you said that, what exactly did you mean?
So there's been a decent amount of research on ketosis as a treatment for refractive epilepsy, for those that don't respond to medications very well. And actually, I've got a real good friend who's a nutritionist at Barrows Neurologic Center in Phoenix, and she's been one of the real leads on that process. And what she's found is that there are those that, yes, they don't respond to medications, they have frequent seizures. The ketogenic diet can help them with that, but it's actually higher in side effects than most of the medications are. It's not a safe, healthy way for someone to spend their time, and it's an extremely limited diet that has very little food diversity and really wreaks havoc on the bowel flora. So that's about how much we know about it in terms of scientific literature. Besides that, most of it is really speculative based upon the model about glucose being bad and starving all intake of glucose. There was actually a study that was set up by some people that were hoping to see a strong metabolic advantage to a ketogenic diet in terms of more fat burned and more weight loss when they were put on the same calories from a diet that was actually really high in processed carbohydrate. Gary Taubes and his research group put this together, and what they saw was that on the exact same calorie diets, 2,700 calories for people who, one was on ketosis, one was actually on about 55% carbohydrate and about 25% sugar. So a diet that was honestly set up to fail. It was a straw man diet. But in terms of body fat loss and metabolic rate, the carb sugar diet was superior to the ketogenic diet. And Kevin Hall, one of the lead researchers, has spoken out about these findings and said these were real findings. And there's been a conflict from the research from the founder of the study and the researchers, because the researcher says, hey, here's what we saw. I'm sorry you don't like it, but this is what the science showed us.
Yes.
So in terms of weight loss or physical performance, I've not seen data suggesting that it's effective for those things. In terms of non-refractive epilepsy, probably a helpful thing in some circumstances.
And that was actually the first thing that came to mind when you said that. It's just like you, especially, like you're somebody who had that history, when you were younger, and to see the data showing how it can be helpful for something like epilepsy. But then we stretch that out and we see it today as becoming this kind of new phenomenon. And I just want people to be aware that this might, because it is very sexy for sure, but it might not be what's right for you. So we have to be cognizant of how, what this is doing to your unique biomarkers. I would highly recommend you check that, stay on top of that. And also know that there are other options. There are carb cycling, there are higher carb diets where you're managing your calories a little bit differently. There's a lot of different paths to the goal. And so, but if the ketogenic approach is something that's working for you and your numbers look right and you feel good, more power to you. But please understand that some people, a nice percentage of people actually are going to see better results. And also when he's talking about gluconeogenesis, that's something you might want to be a little bit mindful of, when talking about breaking down your very valuable lean muscle tissue.
Well, and you want to talk about the adrenals too. So what's happening with gluconeogenesis is you're utilizing stress hormones to turn your muscles into sugar. So the lower carb you go and the more ketosis, I'm saying in ketosis, the more you're making extra cortisol to convert muscle proteins into glucose. That's the drawback. You're using more stress hormones.
So what is the trigger? Is that adrenaline, noradrenaline?
It's actually cortisol. So adrenaline and noradrenaline are very quick acting alert hormones. But cortisol is a glucocorticoid, so it's acting more to regulate blood sugar.
Got it. Yes. So let's dive in deeper with cortisol. So cortisol, actually, you know what we'll do? We'll talk about cortisol right after this break, because this is a big subject matter, and I really want to make sure that we create a really great encompassing understanding of this very important hormone. So we'll talk about that right after this quick break. We'll be right back. Massive research is now pouring in with this blossoming field of science and nutrition called Nutrigenomics. And this field is studying how every single molecule of food that you eat impacts your genetic expression. So we're literally talking about how your body appears, your health, or lack thereof. All of this is going to be determined by every single molecule of food that you eat. So whether it's a banana or a donut or a Hot Pocket, whatever it might be, we have to be in tune with the fact that this is going to impact what genes are getting expressed. And there are genes like the FTO gene, for example, that has been found to be this, quote, fat gene and have a high propensity towards obesity if you carry this gene. Now, you can silence these genes by making sure that you're eating real foods that are in alignment with your own genetic integrity. The basis of that needs to be from earth-grown nutrients, things that your body actually recognizes as real food, that you have a history with, that your ancestors have a history with, not things that have been invented in a laboratory like last week. All right, so we want to make sure that we're eating real food that are from earth-grown nutrients. And this is why I love Onnit so much. This is why they're family. This is why I endorse them so powerfully, because they are a part of my life. They're a part of my family's life. And I want to make sure that you head over to onnit.com/model. That's ONNIT.com/model. And you're going to get 10% off all of their health and human performance supplements. I'm a huge fan of the Hemp Force protein. I've been using it for many years. It's one of my favorite things in the world. And I give this to my kids as well. And this is one of the things that I love to have post-workout. Now, hemp is based on some powerful amino acids, some powerful protein building blocks like albumin, which is a very soft globular protein that's very easy to digest, plus Addison. And this is a unique protein compound that's found in hemp that might be the most bioavailable, usable protein for the human body. Crazy, right? So a lot of people today are hearing about the benefits of hemp seeds and hemp protein and hemp oil, things like that. We want to make sure, again, that you're getting organic and that it's made with integrity, right? So that this cold process, so that you're actually able to get the nutrients that you're looking for in this kind of protein powder, protein cake that you're getting with Hemp Force protein from Onnit. So they've got multiple flavors. They've got the Choco Maca, they've got the Vanilla Acai, and they also have a brand new recovery protein that adds in the powerful component of colostrum, which has every single amino acid, every polysaccharide, aka essential sugar, and every essential fatty acid right there in it. These powerful building blocks, growth factors, every growth factor that influences your body's metabolism is there in that protein, the recovery protein. So make sure that you're checking that out as well. Super powerful stuff. Also has immune factors to help fortify your immune system. Just great stuff. And they've got exercise equipment, tons of great foods. Head over, check them out today. Onnit.com/model. ONNIT.com/MODEL for 10% off. Now back to the show. And we are back, and we're talking with the one and only Dr. Alan Christianson. And he is the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Adrenal Reset Diet. All right, so he knows a thing or 20 about the adrenals. And before the break, we were just about to talk about cortisol. So cortisol, and from my research, it's really gotten a bad rap today as being a big problem causer, but it's actually really important for certain processes in the body. So let's talk about that first.
Yeah, so there's a couple of main roles cortisol plays, one of which it regulates blood sugar, and it's categorized as a glucocorticoid for that reason. It also controls inflammation. So if you get if you overtrain, you get sick, you have some kind of a trauma, your body needs to make its own internal anti-inflammatory to stop that and arrest that. It also controls blood pressure and blood electrolytes. And the last big role is that it controls cell permeability relative to other hormones. So your cells have this cycle of opening up and absorbing thyroid hormones, ovarian hormones, testicular hormones, and then periods of time in which they absorb them less effectively. And that's intentional. And the cortisol rhythm of day to night is what controls that cell permeability cycle.
That is so interesting. So with that said, cortisol is not a bad guy. You need cortisol. But the real issue is that if it's produced in the wrong amounts and at the wrong time as well, can be an issue. Mm-hmm. So the adrenals, this part of our physiology has some really important roles. You know, we kind of tend to think about like fight or flight mode, but let's dive in and actually talk about the adrenals. And then, well, actually, let's just do that first. I got so many things I want to talk to you about. So let's talk about the adrenals, where they're located, and what their role is.
Yeah.
So they're most commonly sitting on top of your kidneys, but there actually is some variation. There's times in which they're not at the same spot, or there's more than two of them, or they're elsewhere. But typically you've got one on top of each kidney. To be really precise, because of your liver, the right one sits a little bit lower than the left. It's kind of pushed down a little bit. And they're about the size of a dice, like a little rolling dice, and they make over 57 hormones. There's layers to them. So the outer layers make the hormones that regulate blood sugar. The inner layer, the middle layer, makes hormones that regulate electrolytes, and the deepest layer makes hormones that regulate reproduction. Do you want to know how I memorized that?
Yes.
Of course.
So we got a lot of weird things to memorize in medical school, and if they're a little bit risque, they stick in your mind easier. So sugar, salt, and sex, the deeper you go, the sweeter it gets.
I love it.
All right. That's going on a t-shirt. It's done. It's done.
Call it committed to memory.
So with understanding so the adrenals are just so important and so powerful, but just even that little insight of like, you might have more than two, right?
Yeah.
Like that is so eye-opening because we think that we're this like very symmetrical being, right? And until we get to the bits, right? That can be a little bit weird. Like, oh, you're symmetrical, weird. And then, but with the adrenals, even those are kind of lopsided. It's like, pull your adrenals up, It's just a little bit, they're kind of strange organ. But I wanted to talk about this term now. And oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this diagnosis of adrenal fatigue. And you say that this is actually, even what it's called is a bit of a misnomer. So let's talk about that.
So imagine that in your world that the word nutrition was a misnomer and you had to bite your tongue every time you said it. That's how I feel about adrenal fatigue.
That's great.
So there's a real thing. We talked about the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the adrenals, and those three together make up what's called the HPA axis. And that's really your regulation of life is good and you're safe and you can have babies, you can fix yourself really well, or you've got to panic and hunker down for something dangerous to happen. There's two big different modes we're in, been called fight or flight and feed and breed. And the HPA distinguishes which mode we're functioning in. So there's a real problem by which that HPA becomes quick to go into a panic mode. And early life trauma is a huge factor for that. The cumulative stress loads, the pace of modern life, it's a very real phenomena. But that phenomena, to call it adrenal fatigue, is a little misnomer because it implies that the adrenal glands are weakened or that they're sluggish, and that if they're making too little cortisol, it's because they're worn out and they're unable to do so. And there is a state in which that happens, but that's not this one. It's called Addison's disease, and it's an autoimmune disease. It's the Hashimoto's of the adrenals. So it's an autoimmune disease in which the adrenals get broken down and they don't have enough parts left to make enough hormone. But that's really rare. That's a few people per million. So this other thing, this HPA dysregulation, is probably affecting the majority of us in the modern world to some degree. But it's not fatigue. So cortisol is low because your body wants to lower it and wants to adjust it to give yourself space to heal. So with the expectation that it's some errant mistake about cortisol not being made in adequate quantities, then many think about that and think, well, why not just give cortisol as a medication and then reverse it if the problem is the lack of cortisol? And that's the mindset that comes from that misunderstanding.
Okay, so I want to continue on this, but I want to jump back really quickly and talk about Addison's disease.
Yeah.
So what have you found to be the underlying culprit for Addison's? Is this similar to what can happen with Hashimoto's?
Well, it's some similar culprits. There's probably a stronger genetic facet, but there still can be similar immune stressors that seem to be behind that. It is more rare, and it's oftentimes less on a continuum. Hashimoto's, there's a continuum, and there's many, but probably 20, 25% of people that, regardless of what they do, it's going to go away and they're going to get better. And there's another group to where it will slow the gland down a bit, and it will just stay there to where it's somewhat sluggish. And another group where the gland's going to get shut down and totally destroyed. So with Addison's, there's not so much of that distribution. It's a much higher percent of just full degradation and full destruction of the glands.
Now, with this, and so we're saying this biting our tongue, adrenal fatigue. So we really need to look at, because people are experiencing, first of all, the symptoms. Let's talk about the symptoms so people might get and understand that this might be a potential issue for me. And then what are the things that we really need to do to try and reverse this condition?
So the symptoms, I want to talk about symptoms, but also symptom distinguishers. So the symptoms, we can see things like craving of sugar or salt, big gaps in mental function, energy dropping off, chronic muscular pains, changes to skin, mid-body weight gain, loss of skeletal muscles, mood changes. Now, those can be very vague symptoms that many things can cause. Because the adrenals have this role of controlling your circadian cycle and your daytime versus your nighttime rhythms, one really specific nuance of symptoms that points more towards them is that there's a daily cycle to them. So someone who says, I'm tired all the time, that could be from the adrenals, or it could be because they're anemic or any other number of causes. But if someone says, hey, I'm great, but I crash at like 2 p.m, like, oh, okay, that's more likely to be an adrenal problem.
Interesting.
Well, we just had a conversation about sleep and napping.
Yes.
And how if we're pulled to that nap, we need to take a closer look at what else might be in play. And one of those is a great night's sleep. But then with this in consideration, there's a few more things that we need to pay attention to.
Well, and the adrenals do affect sleep. So the pineal gland, which is a little tiny thing near the back of the brain, that's making melatonin. And melatonin and cortisol sit on a seesaw with each other. So in the morning, you wake up, you make a boost of cortisol, and you shut off melatonin production. And then at night, your cortisol plummets, and that triggers melatonin output. So cortisol is the leader of that band, so to speak. So if cortisol is not right, melatonin won't be right. And you won't get tired when you should. You won't wake up when you should, and you won't feel well rested.
Right. And like a seesaw, be stagnant, just stuck.
Yeah. Which is so boring, right?
You said
You're the worst seesaw partner ever. But this understanding, like you just mentioned, of them having a inverse relationship, and cortisol is actually the leader of the band. I guess it's like Van Halen, right? I think it's the guitar player. Suspiciously, he's not because it's usually the person who out front. He's really the leader. Right. And melatonin for us is like we just want to produce melatonin so we can get great sleep. Well, cortisol is actually the band leader here, and you can get replaced, right? So, with that said, what can we do to really focus on improving or reversing? And again, I get it, bite your tongue with adrenal fatigue. What do we really need to do? Because a lot of people are struggling with these symptoms. What's the real solution here?
So they're real symptoms. The nice thing is that this really is reversible. And first thing is getting a clear diagnosis to make sure that it's not something else that's causing the symptoms, but assuming that's what the cause is. Two things I think are most powerful. One is carb cycling, and I'll give some more depth on a version of that because there's different forms of that. And the other one is light therapies. So carb cycling, I talked in the reset diet about how carbs lower cortisol. They raise insulin, and insulin and cortisol are also, there's lots of seesaws in here. They have also got a seesaw going. So if you have some healthy carbs later in the day, that can serve to keep cortisol from being as high in the evening. And any kind can work well for that. It can be from vegetables, from legumes, from intact whole grains. They can all get the job done. But it does take upwards of about 3/4 of a cup of a dense form of carbohydrate. So for vegetables, we're thinking like sweet potato or squash or potatoes or some sorts. The other big thing, though, is light therapies. So one of the main things that kept us in rhythm in the natural world before we were modernized was waking up to sunlight. The intensity of light, but also the wavelengths of it, they stimulate the brain to start the first step that ends up leading into the whole nighttime cycle. And indoors, it's so weird, except right now I'm in the Sonoran Desert, and outside it's always bright, and I've got this big sliding glass door here. But this side of that window, I would guess the light intensity in the room is maybe about like 500-600 lux, light intensity units. And if I go just outside that window, it would be about 130,000 lux.
Wow.
Our brains compensate better than any camera. I mean, we can walk around by candlelight and not hit the walls. We can see. Yeah. I mean, go outside in a sunny day and still navigate. It's like, millions of magnitudes of order different light intensity. But we don't realize how much brighter it is outside than inside. And inside, doesn't matter how many windows, how many lights, it's not enough to really tell your brain now it's morning.
Wow.
Is that a light therapy device I see behind you there?
No. It's a studio light.
Okay.
I do use light therapy devices because a lot of times of the year, you can't get the light intensity you need outside because the sun's not up when you're waking up for sometimes.
Yeah. So what would you, there's visors, there's light boxes, there's earbuds. So what do you generally recommend?
So in the morning, some kind of a light box that emits, the units are LUX. I was just saying this the other day and someone thought I said 10,000 bucks. No, it's 10,000 lux. They're about $100. They're pretty cost effective, but you want ones that emit about 10,000 lux of light intensity. And our bodies are so cued to the natural environment. If that light's coming straight at you or from below, it won't help at all. You need a light source that's just from above your head. So the better ones have a platform. You put them on a desk or a table, and you look down and have breakfast or read or journal or something, and you get that light from above like the sun would provide.
So interesting.
Exactly.
And so there's like really solid research showing that these light boxes are effective for things like seasonal affective disorder, right? Mm-hmm. Especially during the times when the quote winter blues, and how helpful that can be with helping with sleep, depression, things of that nature. So this is something to look into. If you're somebody who struggled with any of those symptoms, those conditions, maybe some light therapy could be helpful there as well. But as we're learning today, this can be extremely helpful for what we know as adrenal fatigue. But I want to go back. Okay. We got to talk more about carb cycling. So
for sure.
What does that even mean?
It's been used in different contexts. When I first wrote the manuscript for the book, the term hadn't been out much, but in the process of the book finishing, it was often used to talk about doing, high carbs for a couple of days and low carbs for a few days. And that's not so much the version I was referring to. It was more so in the context of one day, more so pushing more of your carbohydrates to your later meal.
Yes.
And the funny thing is that the protests are predictable, but if I eat carbs at night, I'll get fat. So the cycle is that, if you take any diet that's already too much food and you add just processed carbs on top of it, that's a problem.
Right.
But they've done some papers showing that one of the better ones was done on Israeli police, where they were on controlled diets in an institution and exact same food amount, same food, same calories, but one group had their carbs pushed to the nighttime. Mm-hmm. And that group had significant fat loss, significant changes in inflammation, better blood sugar. So the assumption is that when you eat something, you're going to use it right away. They say that if you're going to eat carbs, eat them in the morning when you can burn them. Like, well, no, the gas tank doesn't go to the engine that quickly. What we're burning right now is not breakfast. Breakfast is important, but we're not burning it in the daytime. We're mostly burning yesterday's food right now from glycogen. So think about marathoners. It's not a pasta breakfast before the race. It's a pasta dinner the night before. That's how you get fuel into your muscles. That's the time frame that it takes.
Very interesting.
Ooh.
And in the morning as well, you're kind of setting the pace for your metabolism as well. This isn't a time to carb load to start your day,
Not so much. Protein's so helpful in the morning. And you're right, not so much because you're burning it for fuel, but you're really setting up the metabolic rate and your insulin pathways.
So we're backlogging our carbs, putting them later in the day. And we talked about this on a recent episode with Morris Chestnut and Obi Obadike, who's this celebrity trainer. That's one of the myths that they set out to bust, is that eating carbs at night is going to make you gain weight. And it doesn't work like that. And I shared a story that when I was this is kind of the beginning of my career and really transformed my health, I would eat like 2 bowls of cereal and a banana every night. And I was my leanest that I have ever been outside of like really extreme cutting things, watching what I eat, exercise, but just not, from working out a few times a week, eating really healthy. I was like floating around, 7-8% body fat easily, and I was eating that many carbs at night. And I don't recommend doing the cereal before bed. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. But I did evolve. Like a lot of times with when we're working on our health, we take these steps. I went from Honey Nut Cheerios, like I had this intimate affair with this bee, right? To organic Honey Nut Cheerios, to like organic shredded wheat, and just like all these things that just continue to have that bowl with milk in it and some kind of crunchy substance, right? That's really what I was looking for, and so we go through those steps. But eventually, and my wife can tell you, that's when she was my girlfriend, I would have so many empty boxes of cereal, but I was like, it's organic, it's high fiber, but we can go for much higher quality foods. But again, everything is still an option, as he's talked about, like even having these processed carbohydrates in that particular study you mentioned, people are still getting benefits. But we, of course, do want to consider, what are you making your cells out of, right? Yeah. So we want to go for the highest quality stuff that we can and just think about, what have we evolved eating the longest? That's probably our best measuring stick of what's going to be great for you right now. So with this, I think that it's important to talk about, when we're talking about adrenal fatigue, this term, what are some of when we're transitioning out of it, right? We're getting ourselves healthier. Are there any specific, outside of the carb cycling, any specific nutrients, diet recommendations to help to support our adrenal function? Well,
the more you balance your blood sugar, the better. So the glands have to put a lot of work into propping up your blood sugar when it drops off. So just having food on a regular enough basis. And breakfast is huge towards that. Oddly enough, from doing those continuous glucose meters, I would see that first meal would predict the whole day's blood sugar response curve, whether you had it or not, whether it had adequate amounts of protein or fiber. One food element that I've been excited about and put a lot of time studying and recommending is a compound called resistant starch. So the more your blood sugar is stable, the healthier your adrenals are. We've talked about diabetes. We touched on that. That's a disease of high blood sugar. The worst blood sugar disease of all is a thing called glycogen storage defect. And that's something by which, if people do not eat over the course of a few hours, they can die. We talked about how we pull glycogen out of storage to raise our blood sugar. Some people can't make glycogen at all. So in the absence of food coming in their bloodstream for blood sugar, they perish. They would go into a hypoglycemic coma and just die. So with people that had kids with this disease, sadly, they didn't tend to have a long lifespan, but also in terms of logistics of life, no one could sleep at night. You had to be feeding every hour and a half or so. So no one got to sleep throughout the night at all in the household. But long about in the 80s, the mid-80s, some researchers saw these highly branched, high amylopectin carbohydrate derivatives, and they started speculating that maybe these would work differently. And they gave them to some of these kids as food at nighttime, and they saw they could get 7 to 9 hours of stable, steady blood sugar, which was just unheard of. No food had done that before. So resistant starch, unlike carbohydrate, is not absorbed in the small intestine. It's actually converted to fuel by good bacteria in the large intestine. So because it's working further down, it takes a long time to kick in. It doesn't cause insulin spikes or cortisol reactions, and it has huge beneficial effects upon the gut flora and inflammation in the body.
Oh, that's super
important, but this is going to be a little bit of a rigid kind of paradigm shifter here for people who are following, maybe like a paleo protocol and things of that nature, because of some of the things it's going to include, but they can be life-saving in some aspects. Even resistant starch is so important for certain gut bacteria. We've talked about this many times on the show, that there are many species of gut bacteria, and we're seeing like endangered species extinct, some species going extinct. Resistant starch is a big key to that. So first, can you talk about what are some of our options for resistant starch foods?
The densest versions of that are going to be tubers and legumes. So various types of potatoes, not so much in sweet potatoes, a little bit, but we'll see this in some of the tropical type plants as well. The way they're cooked affects it. So when potatoes are boiled and then refrigerated and then reheated and then cooled and reheated, they keep making more and more of it. So that's one of the very densest sources. White beans, navy northern cannellini beans are also pretty high in that. And then underripe bananas and plantains have some of it as well. You know, ironically about the paleo thing, I can't keep my nose out of controversy sometimes, but I really stumbled across this concept and it made me kind of nuts. So the whole paleo movement came from the Paleo Diet book from 2010. And this book went on and on about the ketobans. And Lindbergh's studies had come out a few years back looking at the ketobans, these people in their excellent health. You know, they all smoked. They were like 76% smokers for the females, 80% for the males, but no one had blood pressure problems and no one had heart disease. And it was so bizarre that this researcher compared them against a similar group of Swedes. And he saw that, yeah, their heart disease rates were just more than tenfold different. And he attributed much of it to their diet. So the Paleo Diet book recommended a diet, which oddly enough was almost the exact opposite macronutrient ratio as the ketobans diet. The ketobans diet was 70% carbohydrate, and it was mostly based upon tubers and starchy foods. And the Paleo Diet book recommended a diet that was about 30% or less carbohydrate and avoiding all those foods. So that makes me nuts. But the ketobans had high amounts of starch and resistant starch in their diet. Mm-hmm. So they were on a paleo diet, but that's not what the paleo diet has come out from.
Right. Yeah. So we got to keep that in mind, is that ratio, you know, the macronutrient ratios for you. And I like to point people back to, if we can have access to what do your genes expect? You know, if we look at your lineage a little bit closer, you know, like, are you somebody whose bloodline is closer to like Norway or to someplace in Brazil? You know, like, these little subtle things matter, which that ratio, instead of being so dogmatic, like I need to have 20% fat and 80%, you know, but to have the audacity to change things up for yourself, to experiment and to see where you feel best, and also where your blood work, because we can look at that stuff. And he's even talking about having that monitor on to check what's going on with your blood sugar if you really want to get super geeked out about it, you know. But I think it's really important, because when we talk about a food like legumes, you know, we're talking about beans, this was something that is excluded. It's like a really bad food. It's not labeled as, you know, paleo, whatever the case might be. And I love the paleo framework. I think it's incredible and so helpful for people. But we don't want to limit ourselves. We want to look at, again, have humans been eating this food a long time? Yes, they have. And here's the key, though, is that we want to make sure, ideally, you know, they have secondhand enzyme inhibitors. You know, we want to soak the beans. That's going to help with the digestive expression. Because, you know, a lot of people have the thing with, you know, if you eat beans, you're going to fart, you're going to be, you know, gassy or whatever. A lot of times it's just from the beans not being prepared properly, right? Also, the cooking time, those kind of things can really help a lot. And it's just something that might be consideration, you know, if you're following a paleo protocol and maybe you're having some gut dysbiosis, adding in some resistant starch might be game-changing for you. Yeah,
and if you do it too abruptly, it might be too game-changing in the moment, because it's
right. Yes.
Gradual transitions can be smoother.
Right.
But you talked about how you can see day-to-day symptoms, you can see blood sugar, and that's so true. It's important to really be mindful of your current health and your current states. One thing that's a pitfall, though, is that things like chronic disease and longevity, you're not aware of until it's too late. You know, nothing you do or you perceive on a day-to-day basis can tell you what's going to happen in your future. So that's why there's value in looking at some of the populations that we've tracked well and seen higher rates of longevity and lower rates of chronic disease, and we can learn from them.
Absolutely. You know, with that said of not jumping too quickly into either thing, you know, I remember this little meme where it's just like doing back squats after eating a bean burrito. I, too, like to live dangerously. So, Dr. Alan Christianson, I've got a final question for you, and this has been so enlightening, and I just love speaking with you. But can you share, what is the model that you're here to set for other people with the way that you're living your life personally?
I think a big thing is thinking about how it is you make decisions. You know, not just a matter of what advice you follow, but why you follow the advice. And there's a big distinction between information that's an idea or information that's an actual data point or an experiment or an outcome. You know, I'm looking out my window, I can see about where Sky Harbor Airport is. And I could look at a map and I could speculate, I could take this highway, that highway, and the other highway, and I can make a really elegant model on how to get there. And someone else could say, hey, I'm an Uber driver, I do this all day long, and that's not the best way to go. Mm-hmm. So it's so important to try to model things after experience and data points, and not just ideas and expectations. And one thing to model I would talk about too, just in closing, is having some taking some space, always taking some time away to visit things and rethink the big perspectives, especially on your health. I just came back from one of my quarterly retreats. These have evolved over the years, but now I backpack in the wilderness for a few days and bring a notebook and not too much else. And times like that where you're just off the grid and away from day-to-day activities are so critical to understand all facets of just your life, your happiness, your health, your purposes. So yeah, just take some time off and think things through.
Love that. We haven't heard that said on the show.
No,
so thank you for bringing that one up. Can you let everybody know where they can connect with you online and, of course, where they can find your book as well?
Yeah, easy thing. Just Google Alan Christianson and you'll find drchristianson.com, and my books are on Amazon and all the big bookstores, so easy to find.
Perfect. And, of course, we'll link all that stuff up in the show notes. You guys can head over to themodelhealthshow.com and find that. And, Alan, you are just an exceptional human being. Your story is remarkable. And again, my first experience in meeting you is like, hey, I'm about to go climb this mountain over here. And I'm just like, these guys, you know, and this was like on a break, right? And I'm like trying to just go find some water and sit my butt down. And, you know, coming from that, from, you know, somebody who, you know, in early parts of your life, you know, cerebral palsy, like these things that are considered to be incurable and just life devastating, that there are solutions, that there is a possibility to get better, is so important to share these stories. And I'm so grateful to bring you on the show today. Thank you.
I'm so grateful because you're such an eloquent teacher and you really simplified, but also enlightened and lifted our awareness of things that could really make a key difference in our outcomes.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Jade.
So thank you, my man. And I appreciate you. And everybody definitely head over and check him out. And again, everything will be in the show notes at themodelhealthshow.com. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. I hope you got a lot of value out of this. He has helped tens of thousands of people firsthand, hundreds of thousands, even we're getting into the millions of people impacted by his work. And really, again, this is somebody who's looking at the data, tracking things. He's not just throwing something out there. Like, he really is doing the homework, and he's been able to help a lot of people with what he's come across. So if you're somebody who's been diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, or you have the feeling that this might be something that has been plaguing you for a while now, he has some solutions. So definitely make sure to follow him and check out his work. Also, we've got to change our lexicon, you know. Some of these things can get labeled a little bit different, and the issue might not even be your adrenals in the first place. It might be upstream.
Or
we've talked about, the pituitary. We've talked about the pancreas. We've talked about the liver. All of these organs, this is like your body is like this beautiful, amazing symphony, and it's all working together to create some amazing music. Or the music is straight up like hot garbage, right? It can get messed up. So we need to be mindful of that. So we want to create a really healthy, happy synergy with a great conductor. All right. And you are the conductor. So you get to make these choices that are really guiding and dictating the health experience that you're having. So if you've gotten a lot of value out of this episode, please make sure to share this out with your friends over on social media, Facebook, Instagram.
Text them. You can put
the link in a text. You can even text the link. Yes, they can pop it right there on their phone and give that gift of good health and insight. I appreciate you so much for tuning in today. It means the world to me. We've got some amazing, amazing guests and episode coming up, so make sure to stay tuned. Take care. Have an amazing day, and I'll talk with you soon.